Hey Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking out the time for this.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, Usman. It's a pleasure to be here and excited to discuss all the stuff you've got lined up today.
Yeah, for sure. This is going to be a very deep conversation. I want to explore so many things around your background, how you came into content, your experience at Flying Cat, all of the things that you've been playing with there. Um, it's just going to be a fun conversation. Shall we just get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. If viewers or listeners get any sense of a lag, I am getting a little bit of a lag from your side, so yeah, bear with me. But yeah, no, absolutely. Look forward to getting stuck in today.
No worries. Sounds good. So, for those who don't know, Rob and I worked very closely at Flying Cat in the past when the team was very lean. We used to be very much in the trenches. So, Rob was the editor and I was the strategist, the only editor and the only strategist combination in the team. And then as the team grew, Rob jumped into the leadership team, and then I also followed the same ship. So, we have a lot of experience working together. I really admire Rob's capabilities around not only content and editorial skill sets that he possessed, but also the leadership capabilities and being a good manager. So I just want this conversation to be all around Rob and Rob's skill sets that he gained in the past couple of years. So let's start with your background. You come from a film and media background, right, with a journalistic touch in your career. In
Yeah.
modern B2B marketing, however, we're seeing this narrative that hey, if you're a journalist or you have been a journalist, right, you are going to become a really good content marketer if that is something that you want to shift your focus towards. So you moved into this marketing world coming from that journalistic world. Have you personally felt like this past experience played a role in getting you a kickstart as a content editor or a content marketer?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, and there's definitely been a push to sort of. I've noticed that in the last few years, like you have, like noticed people saying that journalistic skills are really great for good content marketing because of that research base that you need in order to get content that meets Google's, EEAT. You want to have like original SME research. You want to make sure you've got good statistics, relevant statistics, good research, in order to differentiate your content from a lot of the content that's less good that's out there. And in order to do that, it is an advantage to have some sort of background, whether that's in journalism or even just academia. Because like if you study anything at university or in academia, you're used to a certain amount of like original research and things like that. So I think those things are absolutely a benefit. And when I came into my role at Flying Cat, it was off the back of I didn't have a lot of content marketing experience directly. In fact, I kind of came in off the back of having that history of more of a journalistic experience, and thought, well, I can take those transferable skills in editing, in research, in writing, and then turn them towards content marketing. So I think it's absolutely a benefit. However, I would just say, just in case there's anybody listening who is thinking, well, I'm not a journalist or I'm not an academic, and maybe I can't then be a content marketer or a good content marketer. I don't think any of those things are essentials. I think really what you're getting at with why those are desirable profiles, if you like, is a certain amount of curiosity, right? Like I think the best content marketing is going to come from someone who is curious, who asks, why is that then? What's the reason behind that? Is that adding value? Like if you're reading a piece of, and I'm not going to throw any particular examples under the bus, but if you're reading like a bad piece of content marketing, of which there are many examples, it often reads like the writer hasn't necessarily asked, well, okay, what benefit does this? They might say a feature, let's say, but they haven't stopped to go, what benefit does that give to the reader? Why do you care about this? Why is this statistic useful? Why is this quote useful? And I think really being able to dig deeper into why and be curious is what's going to kind of get your content from passable or good to great, because you're going to be able to it also helps you tell a better story, right? Because you're leading the reader on a path through a story, through a narrative. And if you can link ideas and say, this is what we do and that's useful because, and this thing will help you in this way, and that's going to give you this result, you're going to tell a much more compelling story. People aren't going to bounce off the page. They're going to share the page. They might convert on the page ideally. I think in a greater proportion than would if the piece is generic and it isn't full of that research. So yeah, I think it's in a direct answer to your question, I think they're advantageous skills, and anyone who is a journalist or an academic researcher or something, I think could probably be a very good content marketer. But if you're not one of those things, I think being curious and asking questions, always asking why, is the main part of it.
Right. Very interesting. I think what you mentioned there about curiosity is something that I've heard from so many marketers, even a lot of folks that I've had on the podcast so far. I was talking to Brian Paul Gibson, who's like a customer research legend. He's conducted a lot of customer interviews, and he helps B2B companies. And he was speaking about the same thing, which is if you just have a good level of curiosity as a marketer, you're gonna do good, right? So what you're saying is,
It was
yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's exactly the same. I also have a background in sales, so I did content journalism film journalism for a number of years, and then I worked for about 7 years in sales. And those are the same skills. It's odd because you might not think telesales and film journalism and content marketing are maybe the same skills, but ultimately every sales training in the world is going to tell you the same thing, which is I think what you were just saying as well, which is that same thing of curiosity. It's if you're in a cold call with somebody, you're going to get way further with them if you're asking them, that's interesting, why do you do that way? Okay, how does that help you then? Oh, what would improve that for you? What would be a better solution for you? How interesting would it be to look at this other thing that exists, rather than if you're just telling them statements or trying to drive them down a particular tunnel, if you like. So yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but like I think it's also that it's also a transferable skill from the world of sales as well, I think.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. Very fascinating. I think perhaps it's just that the content marketing as a world, as a sphere of its own, is just connected with so many different other worlds that you can just learn so much from any field that you come from. Um, but yeah, curiosity is definitely a really big one. Well, let me steer the conversation towards building a content team and some of the hiring practices that you've done, because I think that is one thing that you've done a lot of at Flying Cat, right? So, for those who don't know, just for context, Rob was able to build this massive department, a team full of content marketers, editors working together in a very closely knitted um, structure of organization from ground up, right? So at one point, Rob was just an editor, and at one point now, when he's almost leaving Flying Cat, he built that huge, humongous department of an editorial team at Flying Cat. So, having built that entire department up, um, do you feel like on a broader level when it comes to building such big teams of A players, and then getting them to work together very closely and driving good work overall, what are some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome? What kind of things were your obstacles that you had to think the solution of?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound maybe slightly cliche because there's a quote that's been said attributed to so many people. I think it's David Ogilvy's the originator, but it's been attributed to Steve Jobs and loads of other people. That kind of idea that you hire people who are better than you at something and then you kind of leave them to get on with it. Or I've heard it said as like hire smart people and get out of their way. A lot of building the content team at Flying Cat, we got to about 15 people at one point with that team of editors and writers. And that kind of was the approach to some extent of finding people who were talented as writers, reading their samples and judging that they can write copy and that they're good at writing copy, but also hiring on the basis that people seem smart, seem switched on, seem like they're able to show some initiative. And I think the main thing, the thing that's hardest, is that you do need people to show initiative. I guess these days what you might call a bit hustle or scrappiness. But you need people who are able to kind of go off and have the courage to fail, if you like, right? Like go off and actually make mistakes, try things, experiment. If they don't know exactly what they're supposed to do, then rather than asking you to tell them what to do, a certain amount of that's okay, right? But like rather than always asking you what to do, they go away and they attempt something, they try to figure things out. I think that's a hard thing to hire for because obviously like you get these you get these tests, right? I can't remember exactly what they're called, right? I think they're called they're called psychometric tests or something, right? The ones where you get the the different scenarios, and it'll say you've got a project that you've got to hand in on Monday. What do you do? Oh, I work as diligently as I can and really efficiently, or I leave it to the last minute, or whatever. Right? They have these things, and it's like I kind of feel that everyone's going to pick the thing that sounds the best to like get that job, right? So I kind of feel like no one's picking I leave it to the last minute, or I don't pay attention to the details or ask any questions. Like no one's picking these answers, presumably. So I don't know. It's a real challenge to hire. It's very easy to say hire smart people and get out their way. It's a real challenge to do that because you kind of don't necessarily know who you've got till they start, even if you do 5 interviews and several tests, as I think you've probably experienced as well, right? As a hiring manager. But I think that's one thing. I think you need people who can show initiative. I think that's a big challenge. And one where we were very lucky at Flying Cat in the content team. There were a lot of really smart, switched on people who I think were able to just kind of go off and do great work without necessarily needing to be micromanaged. I think another thing, and this is maybe a small thing, I don't want to maybe make too big a point of it, but I think it's also relevant today, and I'm seeing loads of articles about this today that definitely register with my experiences. You've got to be mindful of maybe some of the generational differences of new people who are entering the workplace. Certainly, like from I'm obviously speaking culturally from more of like a UK or like Western European background, so I don't know how much this kind of translates into like where you are in Pakistan. But like in Europe, the difference I'm seeing, for example, working with a lot of people from Gen Z, and I don't mean this as a value judgment. I don't think it's like worse. In some ways, I think it's better. But you do notice that people have different attitudes to what work is and what the workplace is. And I'll just give an example of like, as a millennial, I think that we've inherited a certain amount of an idea that your work self is maybe different to your personal self to some extent. You wear some kind of mask, and you're playing maybe a slightly different role at work. You kind of bury down some of your anxieties and your troubles. That's kind of the idea that you're sort of raised with. What I encountered working with a team where a good 4 or 5 of them were much younger and coming from Gen Z was more of this expectation that personal problems do kind of enter into the workspace a bit more, and that people need that sort of understanding and compassion, and sometimes work to be structured around issues that they're having. I think it's very easy to criticize that and say, oh, they're coddled, or oh, they've got the wrong attitude. But I think as well, it's hopefully a healthier thing in there for them in the long run, because I think they come and they can be their authentic selves. But I do think that if you're a manager or you're building a team and you are Gen X or even a boomer or millennial, I think you possibly also need to be aware that there are slightly different dynamics maybe with some of people from the younger generation coming through. And again, I hate saying sounds like such an old person thing to say, but like I don't say that with any value judgment on those people. It's more just like to be aware of the differences, because there are definitely differences. And I think as well, like in a context where I'm building a team, because we had people across, I had somebody in India, I had somebody in the US, I've had people from across Europe. At one point we had someone in Jamaica. That's also going to be true for cultural differences and norms, right? So some people are very comfortable if you're having a big close-knit team and everybody's in that same group chat, they're in that same group channel. Maybe there are different attitudes to what people feel comfortable saying to a manager or saying at work, or how they feel like they can interact. So I think those are things to try to be mindful of. Definitely, I don't think those things necessarily relate directly to the content team aspect of it, but I think in building a team, especially now that we are a lot of places are either remote or hybrid, right? And they're hiring people from all around the world. I think you probably need to be more aware than ever of the kind of cultural differences, generational differences, and things that build up quite diverse teams. The other thing, and like I've become a bit of a Formula One nerd in the last couple of years, thanks to one of our other colleagues who's in Formula One. But there's the team that was dominant for a long time, Mercedes. Their boss, this Austrian guy called Toto Wolff, he likes to say that they've got a no blame culture, which he means by that like people should feel that they can make a mistake because they're trying. They're swinging for something new. They're trying to do something innovative, ambitious. And if they fail, no one's going to go, why did you try that? Why did you do that? it's more going to be an opportunity for everyone to learn from a mistake that was made. So I think to steal from Toto Wolff and the Mercedes F1 team, I think that no blame culture is also something that you need to instill, and that can be difficult because I think that's another difference with sometimes Gen Z, in my experience as well, is definitely a feeling that they something ominous might happen, or that they might be quite anxious about a situation. In a way, if that makes any sense. But I've definitely had times where people have been kind of maybe afraid to say something or something like that. And I think that if you can create an environment where people can speak up and people can feel that they're being heard, doesn't necessarily mean you listen to every single thing. It doesn't necessarily mean you act on every single thing everybody tells you. But I think in order to get one of these globe-spanning, diverse, intergenerational kind of teams working and operating well together, I think you also need to try to create what some people might call a safe space or a no-blame culture or something like that, so that people feel they can innovate and experiment without feeling that they're going to get in trouble for it.
Right, right. Well, I totally love all of that. I think a lot of stuff that you talked about related to Gen Z and their requirements working in a workspace. I maybe some parts of that I can resonate with, being Gen Z myself. But then, personality wise, there are a couple of things that I don't necessarily, like my own personality perhaps do not fall into that bucket. But generally speaking, I totally agree. And one thing that I don't think I ever noticed was how diverse the content team at Flying Cat under you have been in terms of the generational gap, right? So, for example, there were people,
Mm.
I think, even above 50, if I'm not wrong, right? And
Yeah,
then there were Gen Z people, like early 20s, etc.
2021.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, working in the same pods, working very closely with each other as editors and writers. So yeah, I mean, this totally makes sense. When you have a diverse team, of course, it's going to come with its own set of challenges, which of course also contribute to the output, I assume, right?
Mm.
Finally, you also
Absolutely.
have diverse views, diverse narratives, diverse point of views towards things, just looking at the world differently. Um, yeah, sounds good. So one thing that you mentioned at the start was transferring this ownership and trusting your team, that they are more skilled than you. You hire more smarter people, and then you let them do their job. That is perhaps one thing that, as you know, maybe I've struggled a little being at Flying Cat. So I had this thought process of just jumping into problems and trying to solve them for the team, while you were really excelling at just empowering the team, right? Training them even more, or maybe providing them all of the resources that they need, but still just letting them do their job. Has that whole aspect of your role come very natural to you, or would you say that is something that you learned over time? How was it for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to dig myself a kind of grave on this on this podcast, but I think some of it comes from seeking the path of least resistance as well, right? Like, I think if you get involved in everything, and if you've got a team of 15 people and you have to do um, their jobs, you are not going to sleep. You're not going to do anything else, right? Because that's you kind of, to some extent, you at that point, you even just, I don't want to call it laziness necessarily. That's what I mean. I don't want to like make myself look bad, but at a certain point, you do need to understand that for your own sanity in life, you need to be able to draw a certain line. So if the team was, let's say, me and two other people, and maybe quite junior people, it might be the case that I would be much more tempted to get involved and try and be more hands-on with everything that they need, and answer every question, and solve everything. I think when a team gets to a certain size, it definitely forces you to trust more and let go more, because you just don't have the hours in the day to go down that road. So I think that's probably a difference in the positions we were both in as well, because the SEO team was much smaller than the content team was, and I think probably if you found yourself managing 15 people, I think you would have to very quickly. Even though I know you work long hours and you're really hardworking, I think you would have to go, I can't do 15 people's jobs. Like, I need to get out. So I think there's probably a certain sort of baptism of fire, if you like, on that as well. I do think that yeah, I do like being a person manager, and I do like working with people and trying to I guess empower them. I always feel that it sounds a bit buzzwordy, but it is what it is, right? Like, I want to empower people to grow in their jobs and to do their jobs better, and to be kind of satisfied and fulfilled at work as much as possible. But I think there's also a practical necessity aspect of it as well, where it's just sort of a kind of a sink or swim thing at a certain point, because you just
Hmm.
don't have the bandwidth to do it for everybody.
Cool, cool. Yeah, makes sense. All right. So, Rob, you've hired tons of writers, freelancers, full time team members, editors, writers, right? All sorts of people within the editorial team. You've had a lot of experience just evaluating applications, looking at sample articles, right? And judging whether a writer is good or bad. Uh, if I were to ask you for a couple of red and green flags when you're working or potentially thinking of working with a writer and you're trying to judge whether they are a good fit for the kind of projects that you're going to give them versus not, specifically because I think at Flying Cat we had this upper bar of content that we eventually set for the kind of services that we want to provide, right, on the content marketing front, but not
Hmm.
going, um, bronze tier kind of content that can be produced by anyone. We were trying to, or at least aiming for, the platinum level, elite level content, right? So when you were evaluating all of these applications and people who are interested in working with you, what are some of the green and red flags that you would point out?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it is difficult. It is hit and miss. I think one thing that we did have at Flying Cat, we always paid for test pieces. Now I don't know whether that's the right or wrong way. Like I think personally, morally, for myself, I don't want to ask people to do free work. For me, I would rather pay for a test piece because I just think that's like the right thing to do. For a business, is that the best path? I'm probably not the best judge, but at Flying Cat, we did paid test pieces, and I think that is a huge indicator, because people can interview very well. They can even show you great samples. You don't know, and anyone who's hired freelance writers has probably experienced this pain. Um, you could look at a load of samples. You don't know how much those have been edited. Like, those published pieces might have been rewritten by another writer. They might have been significantly edited. The client might have taken over and done massive rewrites to them. Maybe they've been reoptimized. You've no idea, right? So you can't. A portfolio is great. It's a great starting point. You can look at a portfolio and say, this person is worth testing. But you need to test somebody, and you need to test somebody in your process. You need to test somebody on your content. And I think if you can, you pay that person for that work. But then that's really the only way you can find out. If someone's found out a better way to judge a writer, like without doing that, then let me know, because that would be really helpful. But I think you've kind of got to make your best judgment based on the quality of the samples you can see, and then get somebody testing. And I think um, there's often there's often a discrepancy between the quality you saw in samples and the quality that you get from the actual test, unfortunately. So that can be really tough, sort of finding the right person. Sometimes as a content writer, it can be really hard, especially if you're working at let's say a more limited budget level, because a lot of people, there'd be a lot of times when the CEO of Flying Cat, she would message me and say, "Hey, this great writer's gotten in touch with me. They've and we're talking about one of these writers that's got like an elite tier personal brand on LinkedIn, and they've clearly got their own website, and they're very kind of advanced in their career as a freelance writer." And I would say, "Oh, thank you very much. I'll reach out to them. Oh, by the way, what would you charge for a 2,000 word article? Oh, I wouldn't do that for less than 1,500 euros or something like that, right?" That was not the playing field we were in with when we needed to get freelancers. Like, that would bankrupt us extremely quickly. So I think, especially if you're working at kind of a lower budget level, there can be a difficulty. You identify the samples, then you do a test, and then it can kind of be hit or miss. But I think in general, if you're hiring writers, and there's a chance I was a bit naive on this, because my hiring process was very simple, and it didn't have 100% success rate. But my hiring process was essentially, can they write? Which you judge with this test. Like I say, you look at samples, you do a test. Can they write? And then the second stage was to have a chat with them and see, do they seem like a culture fit? Do they seem like someone who, or a culture add, should I say? Like, do they seem like someone who's going to be a culture add to the business? Do they seem like someone who is going to be dependable and integrate with the team well, and offer something to the team in that respect? And that's obviously a value judgment that can be very subjective, I suppose. But that was sort of the very lean process that I had, and I would say it worked more often than not. One thing I would say, and I've said this on another podcast. I actually did a podcast for Flying Cat where I said this, so apologies if anyone who's hearing it for the second time. But there's a there's a film showing my age. There's a late '90s asteroid like disaster movie called Armageddon. Have you seen it, Usman? Do you know Armageddon? Okay, so it's a it's an asteroid movie. An asteroid is coming to destroy the Earth, and in Armageddon, it was laughed at the time because rather than getting astronauts to go and drill the hole in the asteroid, the US government finds a team of oil drillers, blue collar, working class like oil drillers, and they train them to be astronauts to go to space to drill a hole in an asteroid and blow it up. Right. So they took the approach in Armageddon, which was kind of widely mocked, of like, let's take the oil drillers. It'll be easier to train them to be astronauts than to take the NASA astronauts and train them to essentially drill a hole. Right. That's the kind of the way the movie's operating. And where I'm going with this is I think that I never hired for expertise in industries. Like I never hired for like who knows how to drill a hole, right? Like I always wanted to find out like who is a good writer. Like what's the, because that's the hardest thing. Like you're not, I think especially now, I know we'll talk about AI later on in this discussion, but especially now there are a lot of people who think, well, AI can write and anyone can write and that it's not hard to write. Writing really good content is difficult. It's a skill. It involves tone of voice. It involves storytelling. It involves being able to engage the reader. It involves being able to write clever, short conversion copy that's going to attract somebody to click your CTA. Like there's a lot that goes into great content writing. So I think the main thing was never, let's say if we had a situation where I was being told, we've got a fintech client coming, find a fintech writer. I would tend to take the approach of, obviously, if you can find a fintech writer specifically, that's their specialism, then great. But if I've got the option of maybe an expert in finance who's not a writer, who's maybe doing a side hustle and writing some pieces, or a great writer who can just do research into fintech, I will go with the great writer every single time. That would be my advice on that. Because I think that that's much harder to, I'm not saying it's easy to come into fintech expertise, far from it. But that great writer can do research. They can speak to a fintech person as an SME, and they can take that expertise and turn it into brilliant content. It's much harder for someone who's an expert to kind of maybe understand sometimes the reader or have that knack for storytelling. It can happen that they're great at that, but it's maybe not always the way it goes.
Do you think your opinion on this has evolved over time? Because I'm just trying to think back in the early days. For example, there was definitely a project where we had, I'm talking about the knowledge based SaaS that we worked on together, right at the early days.
Yeah.
There was a writer who was an expert within that field that we finally worked with, I think named Jacob, perhaps, if I'm not wrong.
Mm.
Who we finally hired, and the client really liked it. You really liked working with that person. Although for him, writing was a side gig, he was expert within this knowledge base kind of industry. So have you always been of this opinion that a good writer in general should be hired, and then you provide them the necessary information about that industry rather than getting an industry expert and working with them?
Yeah, I mean, that has always been my point of view. I think you raise a good point, because I think this is the difficult thing as well, and I think this is going to come up several times in this call. Is unfortunately there isn't like for almost any of these questions there isn't 100% kind of this is always the right way to go. It's going to depend on budget. It's going to depend on the position your business is in or what you're trying to achieve, right? I think you're absolutely right, though. There were definitely circumstances in the past where we were like, this product is really hard, and there's something we're not nailing at the moment in how, like, to be blunt, there's something we're not nailing currently with our current approach where we're really getting the product. And was the only way through that to get an expert and then get them to write pieces? I mean, we were lucky because it was his side hustle, but he was a good writer, so kind of it was ticking both the boxes. I think if you've got the time, I still would think having the great writers really have the time to dig in and learn about the area would be the best approach. But I'm thinking back then, I think our team was slightly smaller. And I think we were in a hurry as well, right? Like I feel like in that moment we were
Yeah,
thinking we need to turn this around really quickly because maybe we've gotten
yeah,
made some mistakes at the
for
beginning.
sure.
We need to get someone in now to kind of turn things around a bit. So I think there was a time pressure, and I think that and we might go on to talk about this more later, but um, I think that was before we tried to make teams around industries as well, because I think something we did later at Flying Cat was I tried to organize the content team around, for example, we had a few short-term rentals clients and getting the same writers and editors to cover the short-term rentals clients so that those people built up an industry specialization in that area and became much more expert in that area. So I think that's something you can do as well. If you've got a number of these clients that are in these very technical areas and they overlap, to try to keep the same editors and writers. I mean, this is a slight sidebar, but like obviously that's not always possible as well, because you might have some sort of situation where the clients don't want the same people who are maybe working for another player in their particular product field. So that can be
Yeah,
tricky.
for sure,
I think
for
where
sure.
possible, that stuff's really good to do.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. There's no one size fits all approach here, but I think what you're saying is essentially um, the cost, the expense, right, of getting someone to be a better writer is higher than getting someone to learn about a particular industry. That's what you're essentially saying.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. In my experience, I think yeah, it depends on time, budget. I
Yep.
mean, training somebody to become an expert in that technology, obviously that's a time expense as well, right? That's a
Hmm.
time expense, which obviously is also a money expense. Um, but so yeah, if you're working on a much shorter window and you've just got to get that expert thing and this very technical thing out the door, but then there's a lot you can do with an SME on that, right? And I don't know,
Yeah.
if I can't think back to then whether we had our SME process in place yet as to
Hmm.
how we got SMEs. Because, for example, the guy you mentioned, Jacob, would it have been better for us to have one of our strongest writers interview him specifically for all those pages and make sure his insights were in those pages? Maybe we weren't doing that yet at that point in Flying Cat.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. Totally. Um, okay. Cool. So let's talk about building systems, processes, all of that stuff. I think that has been a big part of your role at the company, and you've contributed a lot for sure. So you've had tremendous experience creating these systems for the entire editorial team to follow. What is typically your thought process for identifying the need for and then creating the required SOPs? So what are your main motives? What are you trying to achieve? For example, are you trying to make the company more efficient or profitable? Of course, that could be one motivation. Are you thinking about just removing more and more pain from the team, making the overall process, you know, with less friction, frictionless somehow? What is your thought process like?
Yeah, I think there's two different answers to this question. I'll start with the one that's not very satisfying and then hopefully come up with a better one. So the first one is that and I think nobody in the company would deny this looking back on it. We over SOP'd, right, at Flying Cat. We got to a point where we systematized and SOP'd everything, and I think you can overdo it on that front. So if you're asking me literally what my thought process was at peak SOP at Flying Cat, my thought process was probably just, I'm doing something, I know I have to make an SOP for it, which is not the reason to do anything in a business, right? Like, I think your question is smarter than what we were doing. You're asking, like, were you motivated by, business goals and things like that? I think the smarter way of doing it, which is probably closer to how we're doing it more recently, um, it's identifying where those practices are that uh, that you need that sort of documentation for, where that's going to bring the most value. And I think in those cases, my thought process was more about not wanting the team to be siloed. Like, ultimately, it's going to come down to money, because ultimately, if some people are doing something more efficient than other people, you want to spread that knowledge and systematize and standardize it, because you don't want some people taking twice as long to do something than other people have found out how to do it. You're basically wasting money. You're wasting motion there. So it's going to come down to that ultimately. But I think the way I was coming at it from the point of view of my team was, I've got 15 smart people here. some of them are doing this thing better than others, probably, or they've got different ways of doing it that they should share. So what we would do is we would get on training calls. We had a training call every month on a particular subject. And quite often, the way that would be was we would get everybody to share their experiences addressing a certain thing, whether it's how they get SMEs, where they find subject matter expertise, or how they use AI tools, or anything like that. And from that, I want to find out, like, okay, what are the net wins that we've got in this area? What are the wins we've got in this area? How are we gaining in this area? And then try to combine that into a process that incorporates everybody's best practices and expertise. So the idea isn't for me to impose something top down and say, everyone do it this way. It kind of comes back to what I said before about the hiring smart people thing, right? Like, it's more about talking to everyone on the team and kind of trying to establish what the best way with everyone's shared experiences is, and then trying to put that in place in a system. And even then, you want people to be thinking in terms of moment to moment, context dependent. What's the most efficient way to do the task I'm doing? Like, what's the path of least resistance on what I'm doing here? So I personally in my team would never want kind of automatons whose job is effectively to read through SOPs and literally just follow them every time they're doing the work. But I think what is really useful there, if you've got those SOPs, is it means when you hire that freelancer or you hire that full-time person on your team, or somebody moves to a project they don't normally work on and has to do a new thing for the first time, that they're not starting from zero, right? They're starting from all the learning up to that point. So I think I'm mainly coming at it from a saving time and money point of view, on trying to make sure that we don't have some people doing stuff way more efficiently than other people, and we're sharing knowledge. I think it's more about breaking down silos and making sure that new people aren't starting from square one when they start a task.
Yeah, I guess the best thing about optimizing and creating processes that actually help the team is that they automatically end up benefiting the business, right? You
Yeah.
end up making more money, becoming more profitable as a company. If you're just making things painless for one person or maybe a small team, of course, as a result, in net, right, cumulatively, it's going to benefit the business. There's going to be less time spent, less mental hassle going into certain things. Just, win-win for everyone.
Well, yeah, and
I
if
wanted to.
you've got a team, sorry, I was just to say, if you've got a team of 15 people, if you do something that saves all of them 30 minutes a week, that's
Hmm.
like 7.5 hours a week, right? If my maths is serving me well, you've got like 7.5 hours a week that you've just gained. Which, depending on what you're looking at, obviously it doesn't neatly go this way because it's everyone getting a smaller bit of time each, but it's essentially the time it takes to create an entire piece, an entire blog post you might get back from that. So
Yeah.
these marginal gains, it's another big thing in talking about sports, right? But it's those marginal gains that add up to victory, if you like, if you want to go that way with the metaphor.
Yeah, looks like you're a big fan of Formula One now. Uh, uh, okay, cool. So I think, yeah, everything that you just mentioned about just making the business more profitable as a result of these smaller optimizations and these compounding effects, I totally resonate with that. Even if uh, I look back at some of the things that I did, creating some systems, like one thing that I really used to enjoy in my role as the head of SEO was just creating these Google Sheets with, cool spreadsheets, formulas, all of that stuff, just to automate some of the things. And then I used to look back at it and say, hey, if we're able to cut this process from 3 hours to 1 hour, then in total it looks like the company is saving X number of hours throughout the month, which means we're not, the cost for this process to be executed for one client is now $100. In the past it was 400 or something, right? So that just
Mm,
gives you a good perspective on the kind of impact that you're driving for the company. um,
absolutely, yeah, I think
yeah.
so.
So one thing that I've always been very inspired by is the scale of execution that Flying Cat as a company, as a whole team, was able to put out every single month. And a big part of that was the content delivered by the content team, right? Of course, you were working with the CAMs and project managers and strategists, but
Mm,
at the end of the day, you folks were creating that content month over month, right? There were hundreds of pieces at one point being put out in the highest quality possible. And in fact, I would say, in my opinion, you and your team was able to, you know, uh, dissolve that whole myth that quality cannot exist with high quantity. So kudos
mm,
to you and your team. If I were to ask you about 2 to 3 different processes or factors or
mm.
learnings that contributed to this month over month achievement, driving this consistent stream of high quality, you know, a big volume of pieces every single month, what would those factors, things, learnings would be?
Yeah, I think probably the things that had the biggest bearing on quality in terms of processes would, for one thing, be SME research. So, as I think I've probably mentioned a couple of times in other answers, like at Flying Cat, we developed a process where we decided, and even thinking about, I don't know if it was called EEAT 2 or 3 years ago, right? Was that, is that a newer phrase? But we were looking at kind of, well, what actually helps content do well on Google, and came to the conclusion that alongside all of the metrics that are the most important, um, if you're thinking about what's genuinely meeting the search intent, if you're thinking about what's genuinely going to be helpful to the reader, you are likely to be creating a better piece of SEO content that is going to rank more and convert more than if you just follow purely chasing the numbers, as it were. And one of the factors that I think plays very high into Google's understanding of whether something's worthwhile, right, is expert content, right? It's there being an expert in it. That's the first E, isn't it? In EAT is the expertise.
The
So
first
I
one
think,
now is experience, but the second one
oh,
is
okay.
expertise.
The
Yeah,
second one's expertise, right? Experience and expertise. I mean, I guess they're linked, right? I guess expertise and
pretty much the
experience.
same thing. They
But
overlap a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So I think in order to get that expertise and that experience, um, we decided that we wanted SME in every piece, and in order to do that at scale with hundreds of pieces, like you mentioned, that has to have a process behind it, right? That has to have a sort of a so without going into too much detail, like we had a process where we were saying, okay, well, this is the point where we identify how many different SMEs we need based on the number of different topics being covered this month. Because let's say for a client, there are everything's in one topic cluster, everything's in two topic clusters. You could reasonably take one SME and use them to cover 3 or 4 pages that are linked in some way that are relevant. Use different quotes and ask them about different things. Don't just regurgitate the same 2 quotes. But you could interview an expert and take them through relevant questions on 3 or 4 relevant pages and try to get the most out of that SME. So we identified trying to do it on a kind of a topic cluster basis. We identified in the system sort of based on how long it takes to find them, using all the different avenues that people would do that, things like Harrow and Quoted and even like LinkedIn, people's LinkedIn networks and things like that. We had to kind of think, well, how long does it take you to find a good SME? How long does it take to arrange a call and then have the call and then transcribe the notes? So we made a process that involved all of that information, like how many do we need, what do we need them for, when do we need them by, and then making sure those were tasks that got created, and even coming out the other end of that. One of the people on the team, Kate, was very adamant that the thing that took her a lot of time was wanting to tell all of the SMEs when their piece was published, right? Which is 2 things. One, it's polite. The second, more important thing, is they might also share the piece, right, in their network and bring more eyeballs to it and help you promote it. So that was part of the process as well, right? To notify the people in an automated way when the thing had been published, or to give a reminder to notify that person that the piece had been published. So I think having a kind of a front to back SME process was a very big thing for content quality. Another one I think would be what I alluded to earlier, which was having content editors with their in their we've changed at Flying Cat over the years how we do it, right? Having whether there are dedicated writers. There were at one point dedicated writers working with a dedicated editor, and at a certain point we changed that to be a model where effectively everybody was an editor and a writer, and then they would work with freelance writers, because I think to some extent that's a more scalable model. But that's probably an answer to a different question. My point on it really is to have editors at least who are in product area niches, who are paired with consistent clients, who are paired in consistent industries. I think having an editor who, especially with a really complicated, really kind of, for want of a better word, high maintenance client that's got a lot of very high standards and a lot of things they maybe look for, a lot of requests they make, it makes such a difference them having a consistent point of contact. Like, I can't imagine, if you think to some, I won't name them now, but if you think to some of our hardest clients, can you imagine if every piece they looked at was coming from an entirely different editor and they had all these different people to talk to? They would be so angry. So
Yeah,
I think,
it
yeah,
would have been a disaster.
absolute disaster. So I think SME process, I think having specialized editors on specialized clients who are consistent points of contact was a big thing for us. Whether that counts as a process, I don't know, but it's something we decided to do. I think having editorial processes where things go through certain rounds of approval, and how many rounds of approval and how thorough they were and how many people looked obviously depended on the client and the time that we were in as a business. But having those steps, looking at an outline, looking at a first draft, looking at a second draft, addressing client comments. I think those editorial processes were very good, very robust. And a third one, just in case having content editors is not a process, I would say that we had a pretty decent rubric for assessing content quality internally. So we not only asked the clients to rate pieces and say, well, give us a quality rating, but we would also take a few pieces. We couldn't do it on every piece, but we would take a few pieces by every writer each month, and we would go down a checklist that was very pass-fail. Like, have they included all the internal links? Have they, blah, it was things like that. And it was also more qualitative things that we had to just, like, is there, does it read expert? Is the intro engaging, or whatever it is? And then the person who is assessing them, who'd be the editor on the project, would come up with a score at the bottom of that, where we could kind of say, well, is this writer doing, it could be a freelancer, it could be one of our in-house writers. Is the quality high? And if the quality isn't high, where is it falling short? What are the 3 or 4 things for them to work on? So I think those were all things that were real drivers from a quality perspective, for sure. And I think just to add to that thing about having specialized editors on projects, like another piece of the puzzle at Flying Cat was we had, client account managers who were or are client facing. But we also had client-facing editors, people who'd be on those calls consistently, who would see the client every week or every 2 weeks, whatever it was, and just be that consistent point of touch. And I don't know. It might be that that's very standard. I really don't know if other agencies are all doing that, but I feel like it's probably not something that they always get with an agency.
Yeah,
That
for
consistent
sure.
point of editorial contact.
100% in agreement with you. I think like one thing, broadly speaking, if I were to put this into a, if I were to just paint with a bigger brush, I would just say one thing that allowed, maybe in my opinion, Flying Cat to be very well knitted with the client needs is that the client never had to repeat the same feedback twice, right?
Mm.
um, they were, and you had all of these systems in place to make sure that happens. For example, just having consistent teams on same projects, and then also internal knowledge transfer, as you said, having this system for subject matter expertise to be sourced, and then also other things that you had in place relate some proprietary frameworks, for example, the brand bible, and then I think the customer desire map used to be one at the start, right? So these two additional resources I also wanted to jump into. In fact, subject matter expertise, being sourced from other experts in the industry is, as far as I've heard, a big pain for writers. Most of the writers, most of the
Mm.
content folks. You've done that well, and then at the same time, you've had these other systems in place to make sure that all of this goes well in a well connected, well articulated manner. Can you talk about how you thought of and then build that whole thing around brand bible as a living document, the kind of information that you would have in there? Because I don't think it's a resource that most of the companies are
Mm.
thinking about building and then also updating regularly.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important, and there were several iterations. You've kind of gone over a few of them. So when we first started, we would have these TOV guides, we called them, right? TOV ICP guides, so tone of voice and customer profile guides, right? And um, those just we they got added to so much over the in their scope, right? Over the time we were working on them, that at some point calling it TOV and ICP didn't really fit anymore. We kind of decided, well, it's an overall brand Bible. And we ended up having this document as a single source of truth, because I agree with what you're saying. I've talked to a lot of freelance writers who work in other agencies or directly for other companies, and there's often a pain point for them is having 10 different documents they're supposed to be referencing, right? There's this one that's got some stuff about a brand voice, and then this one that's the updated brand voice, but still look at the first document because there's a bit in there that's still relevant. And then we've got this thing here that's got some customer interviews in it, and then there's this report we want you to read, blah, blah, blah. And there's like a whole folder full of all these different things. And what we discovered was that, especially with freelance writers, but it's also helpful for in-house writers. Obviously, in-house writers over time depend less on these documents, right? Because if they're writing for the same client every week, they probably don't have to consult this document every time they're doing it, at least not in painstaking detail. But if you've got a freelancer coming on a project or a new writer coming on a project, the chances of them catching every requirement in terms of the use of punctuation, let's say, or the way that client formats images, the type of images they like to include, the types of SMEs they are happy for us to speak to versus not happy for us to speak to might be different on a certain client. Their tone of voice, their brand values, their technology, their banner features, and what benefits they give to their clients. They've got no chance, or shall I say, slim chance, of getting those things all together perfectly if those things are across 10 documents, I think. And it's still tough in one document, right? Because that can still be overwhelmed. I'm not pretending it's perfect, the brand Bibles that we did, because you've still got maybe 10, 15 pages of information. It can still be quite hard. But having it in that one document that's a bit more scannable, a bit more structured, constantly updated in that single document, it's much easier than the alternative. It's also a single source of truth, so that they're not having to consult whether these other documents have been updated. So you mentioned customer desire maps. Like when we first started, we had this separate document, the customer desire map, that would be full of research into finding explicit examples of pain points for a specific product or a specific product area, finding examples of pain points, challenges, hopes, what people are trying to do with a product, having all of that information in a spreadsheet with quotes that could be pulled and used by writers. And what we discovered after a year and a half of building those documents, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about not necessarily people not necessarily following everything by the book every time anyway. Or, well, more to the point, what I said about SOPs, which is creating them on autopilot, right? Like creating them because I feel I have to create them. What I discovered was that these customer desire maps were being created by and large by people because they had to be, because they were in the process, right? So there was a process that you made one. So people did the research and they found the quotes and they put them in the spreadsheet. And then after that, they didn't use them because they were in this other document that people didn't consult ever again, effectively. So I think that just added more to this idea that let's get all that information. We're not going to stop doing that, the value part of that, which is finding out what customers say about a product and what their pains are. But let's put that information in this one brand Bible that everyone can use, right? Rather than have it spread throughout all these other documents. So I think it's just easier for new people coming to a project. It's easier for freelancers. And it's relatively easy to stay on top of as the governing editor of a project. So we would make it the job of the kind of the content point person, the editor on that project, the client facing person, because they're in a position as well where when they're editing a document and they see the client point something out, they can then go to the brand Bible and say, well, they don't like X phrase or they don't like X thing, and then make a directly go in there. Or they come out of a client meeting, client says, yeah, we're really liking the content at the moment, but there's this one mistake you guys keep making. And then they come back to what you said, Usman, about not having to tell somebody the same thing multiple times. And the reason they don't have to, hopefully, in theory, when everything works well, is because that editor has taken that information and put it into the brand Bible document. So I think that was a really robust and I don't even know if it's clever. I think it's one of those things, it's one of those things where once you do it, it just is like, why didn't we always do it that way, rather than like, well done, we're geniuses at putting a thing in
Yeah.
one it makes the most sense, right? And it isn't
Yeah.
something everyone's doing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think most of the smartest processes that you were able to build were around certain pains that you were trying to solve, and then finally it
Mm.
just clicked as a certain process, and then we stuck with it. For example, the same, client outline approval calls. If you remember how you came up with that idea, was because one client at one point was like, "Hey, can we review these outlines together?" And you were like, "Sure, we can do these 15-minute calls for one outline," and then that became a whole thing on its own. The brand
Mm.
Bible specifically, I've been a really big fan of, because I just like the first time I went through the whole thing. So, in the past I wouldn't go through editorial resources necessarily, because strategists were doing their own research. A lot of stuff, we were just building separately. But then I think at one point we thought of um, this quarterly TOV call, right, between
Mm.
editors and strategists. And then the first time I was, because I haven't been in client work for a long time till that point, right? Because I think the last 1 year I was not heavily involved in building strategies. So when I went through the whole thing for one of the clients, and I think it was Kate who created that, I was like, holy shit, this is something that the strategist should go through. It's just going to eliminate so much of duplicate work. And then maybe we can even get inspiration for the content strategy quarter over quarter,
Mm.
or, if we have to make any modifications, simply because it tells you everything, right? The kind of competitors the clients don't want to be associated with, the kind of language they prefer to use, not prefer to use, all of that stuff. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
that has been an amazing resource.
and I don't know what's more amazing, right? Like companies, I never know what's like in-house companies, non-agencies, right? I don't know what's more amazing, companies not having these for their own internal product, or agencies not having them, because both of those are kind of crazy, right? Like if you are the company, you work inside the client, for want of a better word, you would think that you would, because you've just got, I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but you've just got your product, right? You've just got your product and your voice. You would think one codified document with all the rules and the law of your product would be something that would be quite easy to maintain and good to maintain. So you'd think that would be obvious. On the flip side, is it stranger when agencies don't have it? Because can you imagine if you're juggling 10 documents for each client, and you've got 20 clients, then that's an even bigger mess, right? So it's whether you're an agency or you're not, you're inside the client, if you like. I think it just makes sense to have that as a resource.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I know we're almost out of time. Do you think we can still just pull two different threads? I have two subtopics that I
Oh,
want to
please.
jump into.
I'm not in a
Okay,
rush.
cool, awesome. So, I really want to understand about the tech stack that you would recommend to anyone who's trying to achieve that scale of content production that Flying Cat did for all of our clients, right? So imagine if there's a SaaS company, and they get in touch with you and they say, "Hey Rob, we want to consult you about how we should put this content engine together so it runs smoothly. What is the entire tech stack that we need, apart from the writing resources, the writers that we need to hire, editors that we need to hire? What are some of the tools that we need to invest in? What are some of the how those tools would fit into the workflow overall, and how can we run this as a well-oiled machine, where at one point you have some random topic ideas, and then the other side you're getting super high quality content pieces from your team, again on a bigger scale. We're not talking about
Mm,
4 pieces a month, we're talking maybe
yeah.
hundreds of pieces a month.
Yeah, I tend to think with this, because you know how I said before about the SOP bloat that we probably experienced, right, at a certain time. I think around the same time we probably in our infancy as an agency experienced kind of tech stack bloat as well, right? And every time we saw a different tool that might be interesting. We kind of got a license for that and brought in lots of different tools. And I think to use another cliche quote, keep it simple, stupid, right? Like I think that there's uh, I actually think the number of tools, like I might be somebody from the client, our process team, our ops team might say something very different to this, right? From my perspective, do you really need more than the workflow management tool and Google Docs? Like, is there I mean, for content creation, obviously for SEO, you want to have something like ClearScope or Surfer, and you want to have Hrefs and all these things. But if you're just talking about the content team, what do you really need apart from the workflow management tool like ClickUp or Trello or whatever you're using in that productive, whatever it is, and access to like Google Docs? I honestly, I'm honestly asking you because maybe I'm grossly underestimating it, but I think it's very tempting to really bloat that stuff out, and then all of those things add up, and then before you know it, you're like, why do we have so many tools?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm on the same boat. I think most of the companies that I've seen who are actually doing great work only have like 2 to 3 very simple tools. Hey, we have this spreadsheet or Airtable where we keep the log,
Mm.
and then we use Google Docs or Notion or whatever the document that they the tool that they create the actual documents in, and then the actual process is very simple. Um, have you if you were to compare how Flying Cat used to run content operations at the start, right, where we didn't have this dependency of creating tons of pieces of content, you were the only editor
Mm.
in the team, versus now, at the very end, where you have this massive team and hundreds of pieces of content to be churned out every month. What has changed in terms of your choice of either systems, tools, broadly speaking, even if we go outside of the question of tech stack, what do you have seen changing?
I think when I first went to Flying Cat, it could have this could be a false memory that I've invented, but I think it was a spreadsheet. I think it was literally a spreadsheet with the update, kind of where this is in the process and that kind of thing. And I do think that as much as I'm on team keep it simple, I do think that in my experience, something like ClickUp is a vast improvement, because especially if you're dealing with a lot of freelancers and a big team, if it's just you, let's say it's just like you and two people sorting these things out, a really small, nimble agency or an internal content team in a company, a spreadsheet might be fine, right? Like, it depends on your scale. If you're not doing hundreds of pieces and there's not loads of you working on them, then a spreadsheet might be fine. But I think if you've got 15 content people plus maybe 20 freelancers, and there's these big processes that need to be followed and lots of complex moving parts, deadlines, things going to clients at different stages, needing approval, coming back, that is going to go wrong so quickly in a shared Excel or something like that. So I do think that it was an improvement as we scaled up to get a tool like ClickUp. And then when you really, I think one of the things we did early on probably speaks to your question quite well, is at the start we had like Toggle, let's say, right? We had licenses for Toggle, we had all these things, and as we grew, the ops team realized that a lot of those things we were doing with different tools, they were all just functionalities that existed inside ClickUp if you knew how to
Yeah,
properly use ClickUp. So I think if you're smart, it comes down to this with any software. I've written and edited enough 10 best X software tools articles to know that this is basically the answer in all of them. But it really depends on the needs of your business, right? It's always the way. But I think if that there's the size of business that we were, most things were possible inside that one workflow management tool. So I think
yeah,
my advice would be, I'm probably not the most qualified to give the advice on how to pick a workflow management tool, but I would say, just based on my experience, um, there's probably one out there that does everything you need your systems to do, and you probably don't need 6 different
yeah,
tools.
totally. Yeah, totally. I think I was just gonna add the same thing, that I think at one point at Flying Cat we went on this consolidation spree, right? Where the
Mm.
objective of the entire company was to say, hey, almost everything that most of these other tools that we have subscription of are doing, we can do within ClickUp already, right? Like the
Yeah, it's the same
toggle
with
thing.
Airtables, right? And
Yeah,
yeah,
Airtel. Exactly. We had that
yeah.
whole content database, and then we were like, why
Mm.
are we doing this separately? We have ClickUp, and then connecting those dots together. For example, when the strategist creates a brief, they don't have to fill a couple of fields within that ClickUp task simply because it's connected with that other table where the database is, stored or something like that. It was just more easier, and then also easier because you don't have to shift so many tabs, sync off so many tools. You don't have to sign up separately for any of them. But yeah, totally agree
So many
with you
passwords.
here. Yeah, 70 passwords, and then LastPass itself becomes a problem. But anyway,
Yes.
uh, yeah, but I think just keeping it simple. I'm totally on the same ship here, and totally agree with this narrative that if it works for you, if the output is getting matched, if you're meeting your objective, you don't have to be fancy to think of new tech stack all the day. Um, okay, so let me end the conversation on this one topic, which I think simply cannot be not discussed, which is AI. So I think it's been about 1 or 2 years since we've seen a surge in AI writing or other forms of AI content creation tools. But have you seen changing, if anything, when it comes to the process of content creation overall? Have you really experienced writing becoming more efficient process due to these tools available to us? Have you seen ChatGPT playing a really big role, especially with the capabilities that it has now, or other sort of tools available to writers in, let's say, conducting research or other sorts of thing? Um, and how do you think it might evolve in the future?
Mm.
Pretty loaded question,
Well,
I know, but
yeah, well, I mean, how it might evolve in the future is slightly terrifying, right? Like from the point of view, or an amazing opportunity, depending on where you sit, right? But like, yeah, where it's going to go in the future, I mean, considering how it's developed in the last 2 years, a lot of the problems we currently have with the quality of the content, the quality of the writing, the quality of the research, its hallucinations, you would have to expect in 10 years, if that, that's all going to be the past, and it's going to be much better than it is now. So how it's going to be in the future, I dread to think from the point of view of someone who works as a content marketer. But how it is right now, I mean, I tend to think the actual gains that we've made for in this industry, in content marketing specifically, the actual tangible gains of using the tools are not in step with the level of the hype on it, in my opinion. So it's become, it's cyclical, right? Or there's a particular buzzword of the day. It was crypto, it was NFTs, it was metaverse, and it's AI now. And I think out of all of those things, AI has the most obvious day-to-day tangible real world benefits to it out of those things. Like the crypto people might get mad at me for saying that, but I think it's relatively clear that like some of those hype bubbles have kind of burst a bit on some of those areas, and maybe they're not kind of changing the world in the way they thought they were. I think the difference with AI is that everyone on the street can tell you like it's not just a conceptually good idea, right? It's like obviously gonna change things. But I do still think that there is that kind of downward pressure from the C-suite, if you like, and investors. If you're in a big company that's coming from Wall Street, if you're working inside the a big company, it's also going to then come from your C-suite, from your directors, from everybody. Everyone's asking, what are we doing with this? Because there's this arms race going on, and people are terrified to be left behind, and they're terrified to tell their boss that they're not doing things with it because they don't want to look stupid. They don't look like a Luddite. They don't want to look like they're not advancing and taking advantage of this tool. So I think that we're in a position at the moment where there's been so much hype around what they can do that isn't necessarily in step with the on-page benefits, in my opinion. But I'm not in the camp that they're not helpful or that they don't save time or that they, because I've used them quite a lot in the last year, and they've definitely reduced time it takes to. I'll give you a few examples. So research time. Obviously, you've got to be careful when you use them for research. ChatGPT and Bing, and I think Claude and kind of all the big ones now, they are starting to give citations. Like they now do tell you where they get information from, so you can actually check the data sources, which wasn't the case kind of a year ago. But you do need to be careful with the information being accurate. But that said, like, it is really quick. It has sped up doing certain types of research. So if you're working on, it really depends on the type of content you're working on. Because if you're working on a tools piece, let's say the top 10 tools for 2024, let's say, you can't trust the AI right now because of it did, it's still out of date, right? Like, it isn't scraping the internet live. It's kind of got a version of what it's read from a while ago. You can't really trust it to know the up-to-date pricing or the up-to-date features or the positioning of these 10 tools. It's you're going to have to figure a lot of that stuff out on your own. If you're working on something that's much more like top of funnel, informational, general, broad, what is X? What is a software management tool, whatever, right? It's pretty good at that. It's not going to be wrong on that. You can ask it, what is a workflow management tool? It's going to give you a pretty good explanation of what a workflow management tool is. And while I would never say to a writer, you should cut and paste and use that exactly as it is from ChatGPT, I would 100% take what ChatGPT gave me for what is a workflow management tool and then reword it so it reads better and then use that, because that, to me, that is a gain. That does save time. I think this is probably a bit of a mealy-mouthed answer, right? I don't have like the big kind of quote on it, but I think like it's there are marginal gains right now to be made with it. And I think you can even save a few hours on a piece. Let's say a piece normally takes 10 to 12 hours to the quality that we were doing at Flying Cat, let's say. I think you can bring that down to 8 hours, 6 hours, depending on the piece. But so you can make some quite big gains with it, but I just think you need to be really targeted and really careful about where and how, because I think we are also at a risk. I don't. You tell me, Usman, if this is true, because this is something I heard yesterday that might not be accurate. Apparently, there's a lot of anxiety within Google at the moment that Google search itself is becoming less useful and
Oh, for
less.
sure, for sure.
Yeah, and I think we've all experienced that in the last year. I saw an article the other day that said that there's a trend now for people to search and then put in parentheses like before 2023 or whatever for the results, because they want to get the non-AI results. So I think we're already seeing the backlash. And I think
Yeah.
part of that backlash is because some people haven't been wielding the tool responsibly. Because I think when you go
Hmm.
into the top 10 organic results, you can tell, even if you're not that savvy or anything, I think you can tell when something's AI, like pure AI. I don't mean like they've used AI and they've iterated on it. I mean, you can tell when it's literally just the AI that's there.
Oh yeah, for sure. The human
Yeah.
capability to detect AI in any form is like, I'm
Yeah.
totally impressed by that. Like, I see these LinkedIn comments all day, and then like in just one glance you can say this is AI. I know this person is just using some sort of extension, but you still just reply to it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. So I think that what we're doing, possibly, if we use it irresponsibly, is we are self-defeating, because we might rank today, but we probably won't convert because the person's going to see that it's AI, probably, or that it's at least not expert. And tomorrow, all we've done is ruin the internet and ruin Google. It's just going to be that there's a new way to use the internet or to use these tools that maybe we don't even know yet.
yeah.
So yeah, I really don't know. I'm sorry if that's not a very satisfying answer. I think like I really like the tools personally. Like, I know it's probably, from what I've said, it probably sounds like I'm anti. I'm I really like them because I personally see great value in them in sparking creativity. Because
Hmm.
I did a LinkedIn post about this a while ago. Actually, there's a film called Her, where the guy is a writer. He's a content writer, basically, and it's set in like the near future. And in that film, he's using AI, but he's using it as a buddy, like a co-writer who he talks to and gets ideas from. And the AI says to him, "Oh, try it this way," or "Have you thought of this?" And then he's like, "Oh, that's a good idea," and then he iterates on it. So it's not a case of it doing the work and you sitting there typing a thing and it doing the work, but I like it as a conversation. And yeah, that's not at this point maybe a real conversation I'm having, or that gives me the illusion of that sometimes. But I like it as that sparking off ideas point, because there's lots of times I'll use it even just outside of work, like in day-to-day life,
Yeah.
because I want ideas. Like if you said to the AI, if you wrote in the AI tonight, like what should I have for dinner? I like chicken and I like rice and whatever. What should I have for dinner? It's probably going to give you 10 examples of things, and then you might think all 10 are bad, but maybe that one of them makes you think of the 11th thing that you would like. And I feel like it's like that for writing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
If you ask it for a bunch of ideas, maybe you ask it for 10 different CTAs, right? All the CTAs it comes up with are bad, but you like that idea in one of them and that idea in one of them, and it's giving you a third idea, and then you do your CTA. Personally, for me, I see it as this collaborative aid, right, to beat writer's block and to spark creativity, rather than a blunt force object that's just going to come in and write the pieces. And I think when I see those posts that somebody's saying, I did a 2,000 word blog post in an hour with AI, it's like, yes, I can tell. I can tell that's what you did.
uh, yeah, I mean, I think one thing that you mentioned pretty interesting was, and this is some principle that I also wholeheartedly agree in, um, that innovation just for the sake of it is never good, right? So the panic mode that you mentioned Google seems to be in currently with their search results, trying to think of SGE, and counterattack ChatGPT's attack on the search share as of now, is also something done by most companies in the way that they're thinking of AI and content creation nowadays, which is, you see all of these agencies saying, "Hey, how are we using AI?" Because if you just say AI, you sound very fancy,
Mm.
and what we should actually care about is AI actually making us more efficient, more profitable, more like better in terms of our output, all of that stuff. Not necessarily saying, "Hey, our competitors are doing this, let's just do it," right? So the actual results matter, the output matters. Um, so yeah, totally on the same boat. One interesting thing that I've also seen, at least in my opinion, is almost everyone thought that AI would have the biggest impact on content creation, but as of now, its use cases are expanding into even more technical things,
Mm.
and less creative things, right? So the content writing, the actual writing and putting your thoughts into words, is, at least from what I can see, the quality writing, but which we actually think is going to resonate with the reader, is still intact, with this, and living in this non AI world. However, the research and the other things, that support that final writing
Mm.
and putting together a good piece, as you mentioned, is accompanied by AI facilitation. So the
Yeah.
way I'm thinking about this in a football analogy would be that AI is maybe the midfielder, not the attacker. So they're good at
Yeah.
assisting rather than uh, actually making a goal.
I think that's a great way to put it. I think that's a really good way to put it. I think it is. I definitely think that it's a fascinating tool, and it's one I get personal satisfaction out of using. I enjoy the experience of using the AI a lot of the time, because I'm just fascinated by it. But it's definitely there as I think as a tool in the toolbox. And at the moment, I'm very skeptical in general. I don't want to be cynical, but I'm definitely skeptical of when there seems to be a drive to like, how can we do all of this with AI quicker, or whatever it is. And I get why people ask those questions. Like, I don't get me wrong. Like, I think they are good questions to ask if you're running a company, right? You have to ask, how can I use this tool to make things quicker? How can I use this tool to make things more efficient? I think it becomes the role of the content marketer and the head of content, the content manager, whatever, to not push back necessarily, but to help manage those expectations. Because I get where they're coming from, but I think if you want high quality content that's actually going to be useful, and I think Google still ultimately wants to prioritize that, right? Like they still want to prioritize content that is meeting the search intent, is meeting the reader at their level of expertise, is going to be useful content. And they're presumably going to find ways to root out the heavily AI content and get that sort of content to the fore, you'd think. So
Yeah.
I think if that's your goal, then you really can't go down the AI rabbit hole too much, or you kind of might get burned as well. I think it's
Hmm.
something you've got to wield smartly. I think it's a really good tool that needs to be used in a clever way and not just as
Yeah,
a blanket.
for sure. If you have a tool, just know that the same tool the world also has access to. So if you're creating content, your 5 pieces a month with AI, and at the same time, the whole world is also going to do the same thing. What
Yeah,
sort of internet is that going to leave for us, right?
exactly.
uh, but
100%.
yeah,
I think that's the thing, and I think no one who works in content marketing wants to feel that they're just making the internet worse. Like, I don't think that's the thing anybody really wants to feel. I think we all want to have a certain amount of satisfaction in what we're doing. Is, you're working in SEO. I'm sure ultimately when you make a strategy, you are thinking of the user, you're thinking of the business, you're thinking of their customers, and how everything can be improved. Right, their experience can be improved. We're going to meet them at their search intent better. We're going to address their questions better. I don't think any of us would really want to turn up in this business if we thought we were just pressing the make the internet worse. So I think, yeah, it
yeah, for sure.
needs to be used cleverly. I think.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Rob. It has been amazing talking to you. It's been a fantastic conversation. And also, thank you for being generous with your time. Um,
Oh no,
how
it's
can
great.
people
Thank you.
get in touch with you? How can they connect with you? What is the best place to follow your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty bad on social media these days, so it's basically LinkedIn for me. So I am Robert Beams on LinkedIn. I'm quite easy to find because my name is fairly Googleable. It's not a very common name, so yeah, find me on LinkedIn and yeah, feel free to reach out and have a chat. And yeah, hopefully see some of you online or in the comments.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and I'll see you soon.
Cheers, thanks, Usman. Bye.